How do you do it to regulate the water?
We recommend that everybody use some form of soil moisture monitoring. The drip emitter regulates the flow of the water. When you snap a drip, I had one of those DRI units with a drip emitter attached to it. Each drip emitter comes with its own flow rate. You decide, based on your soil type and what your plant is, typically for all your trees, you're going to go with the 2 gallon per hour. If you've got pea gravel that's really porous, you'll want to go with a 3, maybe even a 4 gallon. The important thing is to install your flow rate so that you're putting water in the ground just slightly faster than the ground can absorb it. Because when you put it in the ground, you want to see a wet spot in about 15 minutes that's about this big, the size of a small dinner plate. That wet spot lets you know that you're putting it in under pressure. It lets you know that it actually pushed the water up to the surface. So it percolated upward. And if it's pushing water upwards, that means it's under pressure. That means it's also going sideways. After a period of time, it's pushing that water and it's pushing more water ahead of it, drip by drip, pushing it out. Eventually, it gets to a point where it's got such a large water mass ahead of it that it's easier for it to come out the top. And when it starts spilling out the top and you see that wet pattern like this suddenly go to 3 feet, well, you know that, and they will all happen at the same time, okay, within a minute or so of each other. Then it's letting you know that your ground has reached capacity. It's time to turn it off. Any water that's coming out of the top like that is wasted. When you see it come up and you say, well, I sure would like to get more water down there, I want you to know that if you ran your water for 4 hours in the morning, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., and then at night from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., you'll get more water in the ground than if you ran your system for 24 hours. You'll have these really high saturation values, and by doing that, that's called pulsing, because you built up the pressure, started coming out the top, you turned it off, and then the water has a chance to kind of release that pressure into the soil. And then what happens is you come back 12 hours later and you do it again, and all the pressure's been released, so it'll absorb more water. You can take that bulb of saturation and make it as big as you want to make it. You're a farmer, you can say, hey, I want to have a bulb of saturation that's 10 feet in diameter. Maybe on some of those big trees, that's what you got to do. And I tell you what, when you're coming into July and August, your hottest months, you're going to say, I want to build my bulbs of saturation. Now, you don't want to wait until July and August to do that. When the winter time is there and you've got moist soil, a lot of guys will say, I'm not going to irrigate now until April. You do want to irrigate. You want to start building that bulb of saturation, even if you're just giving it a sip at a time. You know, I'm giving it an hour this week, I'm giving it 2 hours next week, because it's starting to build up there. And then by the time you start getting into drier weather, you already have that bulb of saturation. We all know how difficult it is when you've got hydrophobic soil that got so dry, you try to put water on it and the water just beads on the surface. When you already have moisture in the ground, it's so easy to put it in, so easy to follow it. So that's what I'm saying. Install your DRI units in the wintertime. Start putting water in, even though it's moist, rainy, wet, whatever. Put a little bit of water in, just a little bit, sipping it. If you have neutron probes in the ground, or whatever type of soil moisture monitoring you want to use, say your DRI unit, but let's say your DRI unit's there, your soil is right here, 13 inches away. You put, say, a neutron probe, and it goes down 4 feet. When this starts creating a bulb of saturation, this bulb of saturation is going to start radiating outward like this. And by having a neutron probe 13 inches away, my scale isn't accurate, but this neutron probe, or whatever form of soil moisture monitoring you're doing, is going to give you readings at 1 foot, at 2 foot, at 3 foot, at 4 foot, maybe even down to 5 feet. And actually down to 5 feet is a good idea, because what happens then is when you take the readings at these different places, you're able to chart how big your sphere is. You can say, okay, I've got this value here, I've got this value here, I've got this value at the surface. Now you can take those and you can connect it to the other one down here, and you can create the size of the sphere. And you know how wide your bulb of saturation is. If you don't have that, you can take a handheld and you can put it in the ground and you can start working your way out. But keep in mind, every time that you put a hole in the ground to measure this, You just put air in there. Okay, you just popped it. So what you want to do is you want to fill up that hole really good and let it heal itself. You can take your readings, and you can take multiple readings moving out, and it tells you how wide your bulb saturation is.
I was actually going to ask the same question if they're all pressure regulated. You said they are, right? So I've dealt with those pressure regulators before, and they're real delicate. They're always getting clogged because they work with the rubber and so much.
Yeah, you've got a silicone diaphragm inside of them.
Yeah. Is that how these are?
You buy the drip emitters. You can buy whichever ones you want. You can buy emitters that don't have that aren't pressure regulated. You can buy a flag emitter, and a flag emitter just got that little thing that you stick it in, you turn it, looks like a little flag on top. Okay, it locks in place. Whichever type of drip emitter you use that drips water out, as long as it's got a nipple on that we can attach a DRI unit, it's going to work. I want you to understand something. The pressure that you have in your hose actually translates right into the ground. And guys will say, well, wait a minute. I have pressure compensating emitters. How does that work, right? Well, remember how I told you when you put drips into the ground, it starts filling up down there, it starts creating a back pressure, and you're creating this pressure. Well, that pressure as it builds up eventually will match what's inside, because it's creating a back pressure as the water is coming in, and it actually lifts the diaphragm inside your pressure compensating emitter because from the back pressure, so that it's a free flow. So whatever you have inside your hose, I mean, it doesn't free flow out fast, but it flows through the pattern and it comes out, and we're able to accomplish that level of pressure underground. So if you're running 40 pounds of pressure on the surface, you can get 40 pounds of pressure with your drip underground. Somebody here has got to have some serious doubts. Okay, if you've got serious doubts, I want to hear from you.
We're a lot different than California down here in the sense that we have a really, really variable soil. We can have 2 acres and we can have gravel spots, we can have sandy spots, we can have rocky spots, and dead hard clay in the same ground. That is a concern as far as now, how do you get a consistency in watering, and how is it going to work with your plants? We know that water and clay will go sideways real good, and the sandier the soil gets, it drops.
Right.
Okay? So now that is one big part of the problem that we face here in any type of water system that we have. And the other one is because we have a high pH and high salt, whenever we create this bulb of moisture and maintain it, invariably we create a fungus problem or a disease problem.
Say that last
soil.
part again. You create what? Fungus. Oh, fungal.
Fungus.
Okay.
We create something that now is actually harming the tree and the root system.
Right.
And it's been an issue with drip lines. It's been an issue with a lot of different, if it's in clay soil. So now with this system here, how do we overcome those 2 variables?
Okay. 2 good questions. All right. Were you here earlier when we showed the soil moisture values in clay and then in sand? Did you see that?
I did not.
We had growers that asked that same question. When we went ahead and put water in the ground in testing, 6 hours of irrigating, only 6 hours with a 2 gallon per hour emitter. We used 12 gallons that was applied on the DRI, and where they had their surface watering, we were testing that at the same time. We applied 64 gallons in that same 6 hour period. And then we did it on very sandy soil as well. Now, it wasn't a matter of just making sandy soil wet. We wanted to know how long it was going to last. So we came back 92 hours later. Of course, 48 hours later for the surface irrigation that got 64 gallons, that was already dry. It was completely bone dry. But 92 hours, 94 hours later for the DRI in very sandy soil, still had a reading of 76 on AquaTier M350, which means it's wet. So we were able to maintain wetness for 4 days. Full saturation value, 4 days, and very porous sand. And it's because we put the water in, and it's slightly faster than the ground would absorb it. We built that bulb of saturation. Let's talk about why it is that water dissipates. What is it that causes water to dissipate? Water can only dissipate when there's a presence of air. Did you know that? So in your soil, you've got air pockets. When we put water in from the surface, if you do a cutaway, you will see millions of little air pockets. And most farmers will say, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. The problem is that it's very hard to maintain that or to sustain it because it changes so quickly. Those air bubbles in there allow that water to turn to gas, to evaporate. They also allow that water to move, to flow away. When we create a bulb of saturation, the core of it is held together simply by the attraction of water molecules. And when we don't have air in the middle, it's very difficult for air to go through moist soil to get to the core. So now, when we talk about your other question about roots, okay, if we've got soil that's too wet, okay, the roots, it's not good for the roots. We get all kinds of fungal growth. We end up with problems. We end up with a sick tree. With a DRI unit, with a bulb of saturation, the roots will only grow into the desired saturation value, and that's when they stop. We don't get any roots that grow into the DRI unit because it's too wet. They don't want to grow in there because they're finding everything that they want out here. We haven't had a problem with that. As a matter of fact, we've had almond growers in Bakersfield, California, who have stopped using fungicides on their trees and by their roots because it quit being a problem.
Are you speaking of pecans there in California?
We do have some people who are hobbyists with pecans. Their trees are doing great. I can tell you that DRI is on every conceivable permanent crop that you can imagine. And it doesn't make any difference whether it's blueberries, whether it's date palms, whether it's walnuts, whether it's peaches. All of those plants will grow into a saturation value that they like, and that's where they grow. And each one is different. So all we need to do is make that water and that nutrient available to them within access from their roots. And the way we do it, the way we set it up, and the way it's sustained, it lasts so much longer that they have it 24/7. Right now, when you surface water, your trees are getting thirsty between irrigation schedules. And when you finally do irrigate, they process that water very quickly because they're thirsty. It's kind of like if you and I were out working out in the field and we're getting real thirsty and somebody hands us a lemonade and we just guzzle it down. They say, sip it. No, I don't want to sip it. I want to guzzle it because I'm really thirsty, all right? On the other hand, if you had a glass of lemonade that never emptied and it was always there, you're not going to continue to guzzle it. You're going to go ahead and eventually you're just going to be sipping it. Every time you're thirsty, you'll take a sip. Well, DRI allows that water and nutrient value to be available to those trees 24/7. So they never reach that level of thirst that they had with surface irrigation. So what you're going to see is you're going to see accelerated growth. You're going to see better plant performance, okay? And you're going to see that you can actually dial it in to get the kind of yields and the consistency of yields that you want, okay? Before putting on your phosphates, potassium, and some of your nutrients on the surface, and you're trying to work it down into the soil to the roots, and it's hard to do. Sure, you might get your nitrates down there easily. Well, what if you were able to take all those other nutrients and deliver them at the finish line? Start out at the finish line down in the root zone and have them available to that plant all the time. That's what DRI does. Did that answer your questions?
Pretty much. Thank you.
Okay.
In some wells here, I've seen that as the water is being pumped out, air comes out straight from down the aquifer.
That's a great question.
It's a lot of air in some points. Is that a
So-
deal breaker here?
No. We have the same problems in California, other places around the world. Everybody has that problem somewhere. So what we do is we say, okay, look, it's important for you to have there's different types of vents. There are vents that seal up, okay, once they've evacuated air out. And then there are continuous vents. What you'll need is on your mains and your sub-mains, you'll need to have some continuous vents. So that anytime air gets in there, it's still going to take the air out. But at the end of your irrigation lines, you'll want to put like the vents that we showed here. So that way, when you turn the system on, it evacuates all that air. You start out with water going down in your DRI units. And if you have a place where you're going over a hill with an irrigation line, you have to put a vent at the top. You have to think about this and think, okay, well, here's a place where air can collect. You have to have a vent there. If air is going to collect in a high spot, you have to have a vent there. So if you're starting your irrigation at the top of a hill and you're irrigating downward, if you put your vent at the bottom, you can do that, but you have to have another one on top because for any bubbles that have gone up there and collected up there.
If your pump is pumping 80 liters per second or 60 or 70, what do we need to do to be able to change over our pump? Because, for example, I'm watering with 84 gallons per hour emitters on
Right.
micro.
You're going to have to water more land at the same time.
Okay, I understand that, but it just seems, for example, for every emitter that I change over, I need 42. Even if I installed 4 for tree, I still need
All right,
10
so
times more land.
You can get a variable speed pump, or
So what do you recommend though? What are people doing that have big wells and they have a limited
guys who
amount
have
of
big
land?
wells, what they'll do is they'll transferring it. He had four zones, and so when one would fill up, it would start going into the next one. And so then when that one filled up, now he's watering 2. It would go into the third. And so he had a release valve. So once the system got filled up, built up a certain amount of pressure, it would release into the next zone. So when he started out, he could only irrigate 1 zone at a time. And now he can irrigate 4. Yeah, he did that. Or he could have just bought another pump, which is a variable speed pump that can pump less. I can tell you this, you'll be happy that you're pumping less. You'll be pumping less hours, you'll be pumping less water, you're gonna have happy trees. And when you think about the other 1,000 acres that you wanted to plant, you'll know that you can do it.
The thing is most of us here are small farms. There's not 1,000-acre farms. And everybody has 30 acres, 20 acres, 40, and maybe a couple here or there might have a couple hundred, but
All right.
it's not the thing. So I believe that this is the deal breaker. How do we regulate? Because if we're going to continue to need a little bit of surface water for the first year and DRI, I'm just wondering what's out there. Do we have to pump into a holding tank and then repump or whatever?
Well, actually,
Because 2 gallons versus 84 is a world.
It's a world of difference.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah. So, and if I would have just started out by telling you that in the beginning before you saw any testimonials, I'm sure you would have thought I was lying, okay? I've heard that many times before. But some of those farmers who were so unbelieving in the beginning have become on those testimonials, okay? And so they've actually become distributors of the product. We can work with you. There are ways to engineer it. I know all these other farmers in California had the same situation. Everybody's pump and what they're pumping is different. Their situation is different. We can help you with the math on that and figure out a way that'll work for you. And maybe some of it does go into a holding tank. And maybe you turn it off early and you let a pressurized holding tank then take it from there. There are solutions for that. It's not a deal breaker.
Okay, my question is, when we're going to do an irrigation system, we go to irrigation supplier and they make us a project according to how much water we have out of the well, and the type of irrigation. If we have the Antelco is a system that irrigates. That project tells us how many acres we can water at one time. Now, are we going to have these projects available, engineers, to tell us how to set the system?
Okay, so yeah, like I said, what we're going to do is we're working with Diego. The thing is, we have access to engineers that we work with in the States. We won't have any problem finding some engineers that are willing to take the time to discuss what your projects are and what it's going to take so that your system works perfectly. We don't want to just sell you a product. We're not here to sell you a product. Our objective is to make your system work successfully. We want you to have success with it. We want you to have success as a farmer. If we prosper, it is secondary, okay? It'll be because you prospered.
Okay. When we do a project with the suppliers, whatever, they tell us, okay, you have the primary pipe,
Right.
secondary pipe, and then the feeders.
That's right. Yeah.
So are we going to have that available
Okay, so
in this type of irrigation?
yeah, we'll let Diego answer.
Abraham's going to become a distributor as well, and he's going to help us design those systems. He already designs the current sprinkler systems we have. We're going to get with Jeff and understand all the all the pressure system, everything, and Abraham's gonna pick it up real quick, and he'll help be able to design that if that's a concern.
Yeah, so we're not gonna just leave you alone. We're gonna help you get your system dialed in so that it's working and it's working great, and you know how to dial it up and you know how to dial it down. That's what we wanna do.
So I just had a question. I know you mentioned, I guess most of us already have water systems installed. Will this work with our current water system, or are we gonna have to string pipes and that sort of thing?
Oh, okay, so you already have your mains and your sub mains that are going out there, and you're supplying water to your solid sets. Okay, so where your riser is coming up or coming off of your sub mains, we can put a valve in there and just run a surface line right at that point.
I think for me, the main reason I put the hard PVC pipe is I had a problem with coyotes, jabalins, and all that sort of thing eating my plastic pipes.
Do you know why you have coyotes? You have coyotes because you have a lot of rodents right now. And the reason you have a lot of rodents is because when you irrigate, they can smell that water from a mile away. And when they smell that water and they know that there's grass there, they come. And that same thing, it attracts insects. Your insect populations, because you have standing surface water. When you put the water underground with DRI, and you don't have a lot of standing surface water at all, and the coyotes are coming there and they're finding fewer and fewer gophers or rabbits, they're going to go where they find more. But if you wanted to, you can take your irrigation line and you can bury it. You don't have to bury it. But if you wanted to, you could. And that way you don't have to worry about gophers. We've got so many growers in California. This isn't the first time. They've got coyotes over there like crazy. They've got gophers over there, rabbits over there like crazy. But we found time and time again that when they put DRI in, the problem goes away. Where they have DRI, they're no longer attracting rodents. And the same thing with insects. I was at a trade show where a gentleman came into the trade show and he threw an insect trap on the table. And I thought he was upset. And he said, take a look at that. And I looked inside. I said, it looks like an insect trap. It was a little dusty inside. And I said, I don't see anything inside. He said, that's right. And I said, what are you trying to tell me? And he said, well, I put that on my block with DRI. He said, normally we have, and he named a certain type of fly. And he said, normally I could find a whole bunch of them in there. But he said there were none. He said on his other orchards where he used surface irrigation, it was filled with them. So he said he thought it was a fluke, but he went and checked all of his traps. With DRI, he found a couple of flies, but most of it was empty. So the thing is, insects need standing surface water. So when you're having problems with insects and you provide them with the environment that they need with standing surface water, you're going to have insects. If you take the environment, the standing surface water away, your insect populations drop way down. So when we talk about fungal growth, have you anybody here get fungal growth on your trees, on the surface of your trees? If you get fungal growth on your trees, we've got farmers in California where their trees were turning green of all the fungal growth. As soon as they started using DRI, the relative humidity under their canopies went way down, and they didn't have to use fungicides anymore. So installing a DRI unit, it takes about 30 seconds to install one. You poke a hole in the ground, you stick the DRI unit in. There's a certain way that you wrap it to attach it to your drip emitter. The drip emitter is always on the side of the irrigation hose or underneath. Once you attach it and it's in place, then you stomp the hole, make sure that it's closed up really good, and that's pretty much it. The next is deciding how much, when to water. Okay.
So ask you, when we have the surface feeder holes, so 3/4 or 5/8, the coyotes and the animals try to get water off of them.
Oh, yeah,
They
okay.
bite
So,
on them.
yeah, and you're right. Okay, so
That's it.
early on in California, we found that when coyotes go to a place where they know they always smell water, and they go there and the water's not turned on, they chew the hose. But if they go someplace where they never smell water, they don't choose the hose. They go places where they know they've gotten water before. So now there may be a transition. I'm not saying you're not going to get a couple coyote bites or gophers chewing into things. I can tell you that the problem is going to get reduced over time until eventually it's not there anymore. That's what has happened with our farmers in California. You notice how on your micro sprinklers you get that calcification on there? You got to clean it off. You don't have to do that anymore with DRI. Remember how I talked about how we take the air out of the equation? So you never have to replace your drip emitters anymore. The water, all the minerals stay soluble and the water passes right on through. So that's something that no longer is an issue. Now, if you have a tree that's dry, the first thing you want to check though is you want to pull the 1/4-inch tubing off to see if water is coming out of the emitter. Because if something came through and clogged your emitter, there's nothing I can do with the DRI unit that's going to help your tree. You got to get water through it, okay? But it's really easy to check, very simple.
It sounds like a very good product. I'm a little bit concerned because you said a minute ago that we need to buy or can buy the emitter, whatever one we choose. So that means that comes separate. But a 2 gallon per minute or hour?
2 gallons per hour.
Hour, right?
If you buy them in bulk, they're going to cost you somewhere between 13 to 20 cents.
Question is this though, that 2 gallon per hour emitter, I don't know nothing about it. Maybe you can share. How easy does that get clogged? What kind of a filtration system do we really need? Because it's got to be pretty good. 2 gallon per hour. We're using 85 gallon per hour, and they're still getting clogged. So I'm just wondering what you recommend. I'm referring to the actual sand or whatever's coming out of our pump, because we do pump a lot of sand or silt.
All right. Do you use maybe a sand filter or?
Yeah. How fine do we need it?
Actually,
how is it?
If it makes it through your micro sprinklers right now, it'll make it through drip emitters. Drip emitters have a wider opening than the micro sprinklers. So if it makes it through your micro sprinklers, it's going to make it through your drip emitters. Anything that comes through your drip emitters is going to go through your DRI unit. You can't clog a DRI unit, not especially the design we have now. You cannot clog it. Right? Yeah. So I'm saying that the opening that one right there is actually a micro, so that's not fair. But most drip emitters, the opening, the passage that channels the water, is a larger opening than you have on your microspray. So if right now it's making it through your microspray, and I'm not saying that you won't have a drip emitter that won't every once in a while get plugged, but remember you have a wet spot that you see on the ground when you turn the system on. Within 10 minutes, you'll see a wet spot. And now if you're driving through on your quad or whatever, and you don't see a wet spot, and you disconnect that 1/4-inch tube, and the drip emitter is not dripping, have some on your quad, pop it out and put it back in. It'll take you just a few seconds. But I can tell you that the incidents of that happening are going to drop down significantly lower than anything that you've had to replace so far. So, and here's the other thing. I still recommend that twice a year, you flush your system out so you don't start getting sand built up in your irrigation hoses. At the end of your hoses, open them up and let them run for an hour, okay? Do that twice a year and you'll have clean hoses.
He says you need a 100 mesh filter. Simple. He doesn't make the drippers. He makes the DRI. So we can talk to him about that. Abraham says you need 100 mesh to filter for the emitter.
What are you using right now?
Question answered right there.
Okay, and you're recommending 100, right? So, yeah, and your micro sprinklers, you're using 160? Or on drip? Okay, all right. Well, so if you're using 100, you're using, and it's going to work fine. I appreciate your input on that.
In that picture you have in the PowerPoint, you mentioned that the reason the root doesn't go all around the DRI is because it's too wet.
That's right.
Okay, right here we have long winters where we don't have it so wet most of the winter. Is part of the management going to be to keep it wet through the whole winter?
That's exactly right. Even during dormancy, I was telling Diego, you're still sipping it. You're still putting water over there because even though that tree is sleeping, you still have to give it some water. So I'm saying that even in the cooler weather, you still sip it. Give it an hour this week. Give it an hour, maybe 2 weeks later. But
is that enough for the root not to look for the water and clog the emitter, the DRI? If it's only once every 2 weeks, isn't it now in the range where it actually does reach it?
Everybody's situation is slightly different, okay? And we'll work with you.
Yeah,
we'll work with you to show you that, okay, what does it take to maintain some sort of bulb of saturation down there? Because if your roots are looking for water, we don't want them to grow in all the way to the DRI unit because it completely dried out. We don't want that to happen. We want you to just keep putting a little bit of water in there to maintain, and it doesn't take a lot of water. You saw what 12 gallons of water did in the cutaways. It doesn't take a lot of water, and it lasts a long time. I can tell you this too. In the winter time, that bulbous saturation, instead of lasting 8 days, is probably going to last 2 months because you're not getting dehydration in soil. The water doesn't have anywhere to go. Okay, it's just going to stay there, right where you put it. All of you have issues with water. Everybody does. And you're thinking about what you're going to do in the future. And you're thinking about, am I going to just keep doing what I'm doing? How long can I do that? Can my kids do that when they take over the farm? That's a question that you're going to have to answer. But if you're looking for efficiency and you're looking for a way to know that the future of farming for your family or your community is going to extend to the next 100 years and beyond, this is a solution that's available to you. Whether you decide to go with it or not is totally up to you. And some of you may say, I'm going to wait until 10 years from now when the whole world is using it, and then I'll feel comfortable enough to use it. And that's perfectly fine. Okay, but I tell you what, those of you who absolutely need it, it's available to you now, and we can get it through to you through Diego. Diego will, he'll be the contact person, and he'll make sure that the distributors down here have it available. There are service personnel that are working with the distributors to make sure that once you buy the product, there are people that come out there and answer questions for you. And if they don't have an answer, they'll get a hold of me. We'll get you an answer.
Jeff, real quick, would you give them a quick explanation on, we kind of went through it already, but the transition of a big tree to the 4 DRI units and let them understand how the tree will start developing roots, go deeper, and roots that are already established that are far out, they don't die. They keep absorbing nutrients and minerals even though there's no moisture there.
All right. So there's an olive specialist that's up in Napa Valley, and she had said that on mature trees, especially trees that have been transplanted, they will never develop primary roots. They'll only grow secondary root growth. So I've heard that a lot. But when we start using DRI, trees are living organism, and it doesn't make any difference if they're mature or if they're new plantings. They will develop primary root growth that grows down. When we talk about putting DRI on a mature tree, we have to take into consideration the canopy of the tree. So if you have a 30 or 40-year-old tree and it has a canopy that's 30 feet wide, the base of the tree to the edge of the canopy, you have anywhere from 15 to 20 feet. That's a lot of ground. And this tree has got roots that are growing out to the drip line. And that's just the way trees grow. Now, since you're doing surface irrigation, we have these roots that grow 360 degrees, and they're typically in the top 16 to 18 inches of soil. Some of them are a little deeper. But you'll find that when you start digging down around your trees, you'll find that the roots are all in very shallow soil when you surface irrigate, because your roots are growing above the hard pan. All right, so if we're going to take a tree like this and we run an irrigation hose that runs right past the tree on the ground, we're going to say, okay, the canopy is out here. We got 15 to 20 feet. In a situation like this, I would go about halfway, so we'll call it 15, so about 7.5 feet right out here from the base of the tree, and 7.5 feet over here, something like that. And then on that irrigation line, here's the base of the tree. We come out a certain ways, and then we would go ahead and take a DRI unit, come off of the irrigation line and go into the ground over here. We'll do another one over here. One over here, one over here. So there are 4 for that tree. So these are going to create a bulb of saturation here, 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 and here. So what it's going to be like for this tree is there's going to be like a wall over here that provides all the water and nutrients that it needs. but it's far enough from the base of the tree so that we don't get any rot at the base of the tree. But it has everything that it needs. Same thing on this side. Now, we've had farmers that say, hey, well, if this is good, wouldn't it be better to put it on this side and this side too? But if you do that, your tree has nowhere to get oxygen. It's going to be fully saturated, and your tree is probably going to die. So that's why we say put it on two sides like this, and that's where we've had the best success. Now, in the past 10 years, have been challenged by every single agronomist, by academia, by every viticulturist, by every ag expert in California, just about. And we have gone through testing. I've worked with them on testing over the past decade. They've learned from me, and I've learned from them. But one of the things that we've learned together is that this right here works. This works. And if you have a young tree, you only need one DRI on either side. And so when we think about, well, why is it that you don't need it on the other sides? If you were to go explore some of the canyons here in Mexico, I'm sure that somewhere, somebody was on a picnic and they dropped either an apricot seed or a peach seed into one of these canyons, and it went floating down the stream. And you'll find in the canyons, the rocky wall goes down like this, and then you got a little bit of water down here. You'll find trees that are growing in the side of the canyon, like that. So these trees, if you carefully look at the root structure, you'll see that there are roots that grow up into the rock like this. These are structural roots, but then it also has roots. If you follow it down, there are roots that are coming down here that are getting water. Now, even though these roots up here never really see water, if you cut into them, you find that those roots are alive and supple, and that tree is providing water to every single cell of that tree. We don't plant like this, but the principle is the same. When we provide water over here for these mature trees, all the roots that are over here are doing what they need to do to provide structure, to mine, to absorb oxygen that tree needs. Over here, these roots are absorbing water and nutrients, and we're developing more feeder roots right along these lines. So when you first transition a very mature tree like this, I recommend that you leave your surface watering there, because if you see that the tree is getting extra stressed, you want to apply some surface water to it. We want the trees to stress a little bit like that thoroughbred, but we don't want to hurt them. We want to find out where the balance is. So if you have your surface water and you apply some surface water as supplemental watering, by the end of the season, when you turn the surface water off, it doesn't take long, it's dry. But the DRI will still be there, and the tree will know where the DRI is, and it will continually develop those feeder roots. By the end of the season, your DRI trees are pretty much transitioned. And if they're really big like this, it may take 1.5 seasons, but they will transition, and you're using less water.
We have hard winters. All of a sudden, a late freeze comes. And I guess a concern, what we do is stop fertilizing come about 10 days from now and cut the water off sooner so that the tree kind of gets into sleep mode, right? I could see it probably being an issue that the trees have everything they need. They're so healthy. And what happens is your best trees die.
You bring up a great point. So with wine grapes, they call that deficit irrigation. Because if you want to get good wine, you have to cut back on the water, okay? So with DRI, they know that they've got more water available than they ever had before, okay? So they cut back on their water way early with DRI. Yeah, so you're going to monitor your trees. You still got to be a farmer. You got to watch your trees and say, okay, I've got all this water in here, and I need to be able to start cutting back so that at this particular date, I want to make sure that I'm down to where I want to be. Does that answer your question? So all I'm saying is that it's going to take a lot less water to do it.
So my question is, you're saying for the mature trees that you're recommending 2 on each side?
Yes, depending how big they are.
For the younger trees, 1 on each side?
One on each side, and you only need 1 on each side for the entire life of the tree. For the
okay, that was what my question is. Are we going to have to up that to 2,
nope.
or is it?
Nope.
And also, the young trees say they're probably only this deep, and when you put those pods in, as a tree goes grower, is that something that you're gonna need to change and put it deeper in?
No, you're going to put them in at a particular depth right in the beginning.
So
Yeah.
right at the beginning, will that
Yeah, remember
reach those roots up top?
remember how I said you're going to get water on the surface?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So when you first put them in on a brand new planting, you want to have one of the DRI units at 13 inches, and you want to have one that's going to be out at about 3.5 feet. Now keep in mind, the side of the plant that has the one that's moved out 3.5 feet, that's the side where you're going to get the most root growth. Because the other side has everything it needs. It doesn't need to grow that much roots. The water's already right there. But it's such a small root mass at first that you need to have it close. So when your tree then has a base on it that's at least 1.5 inches in diameter, you wait until the next dormant season, pull that DRI unit out and move it out, to 3.5 feet on that side as well. And it's already got connection with the one that was on this side. So the transition is very simple for it. And you can bet that within the first 6-8 weeks, it's going to have roots that are reaching out to this one again as well.
All right,
Okay.
makes sense.
Sure.
Hey, we're just going to go through a few more questions. It's getting a little bit late, and then we're going to go to Lance's farm and do a quick installation demonstration. We can ask a few more questions there. I'm sure it'll come up.
Okay, so the question that nobody's asked yet, what is the price on one of those units?
That's a good question. If you were to go to a store in the States and buy one, it would cost you $3.52 for one of these, okay? But if you buy them in bulk, if you buy them at least 5,000 of them, the price drops from $3.52 down to $2.14. And when you start buying them by, say, 100,000 or 200,000, it comes down to 200,000 is $2 each. So you say, well, what is my return on investment on that? Typically, for tree crop growers like almonds, walnuts, and I'm assuming it's going to be exactly the same with pecans, your return on investment should be within 2 years. Everything that you paid for the DRI units should pay for itself within 2 years. From that point on, all of that reduction in water, all that extra expense that you normally are paying right now becomes part of your bottom line. And when you start dialing it in so that your yields are affected and your yields are consistent. Okay, so I've got a wine grape grower in California. Wine grape growers are real fickle. They won't let you use their name at all. He said to me, look, the reason I use DRI, he said, I have all the water that I need. He said, but when I sell my grapes, he said, I've been almost able to triple my price on my grapes per ton because of the consistency of quality that I get with DRI. You will be able to, know your trees, and once you get your trees dialed in, you're going to find out what is perfect. And once you get it perfect, you say, I think I can make it better than that. And you'll make it even better than that. And once you know what's perfect and you get it completely dialed in, you can replicate that all the time. So your yield will improve. Return on your investment is going to be a beautiful thing for you.
Thank you.
The availability on the purchase orders.
If all of you, let's say that you only wanted to buy a few thousand, or some of you want to buy 10,000, or some of you want to buy 100,000, I recommend that you get together with Diego and you place one large order. Share all the shipping costs, share the good price, and that way everybody gets their DRI units at the same time. If you're planning on putting them in the dormant season, you better order them before the end of June. We have people placing orders for millions of units all the time. Our production schedule, I own the manufacturing. Our production schedule is we bought a bigger building, and we're probably going to have to buy more land and put another building. But the point is that if you want to have it, you have to give us time to make it. You get your orders in before the end of June, we can get it to you during the dormant season, and you can get them installed.
Okay, so my question is, inside of the emitter, it has a little copper piece. What's that for?
Okay, so all right, so interesting thing about copper. So when we first designed the DRI unit, I didn't know whether or not, capillary roots, they'll grow places you never imagined, right? And I didn't know whether the capillary roots were going to try and find their way up into the water supply. But I did know that copper, when you take copper and you stick it into the earth, it gets an electrical charge. So when copper has an electrical charge, it repels capillary root growth. So if you were to go to Rainbird or Jane or any of those big companies, I'm pretty sure that they got the idea to use copper in their irrigation from us. By having copper, now you say, well, the copper inside our DRI unit is not connected with the earth. How does it get an electrical charge? When you run water through it, the water connects it to the earth. And the minerals in the water will transfer the electrical charge. So that way, if capillary roots ever did grow into that, they would not clog the water. That's the reason for the copper. Just for insurance. We've never had one where roots grew into it. Never. So.
Okay, guys, we're going to wrap this up. Any of you that would like to join us over in Los Chinos over by Justin LeBaron, JR's house. Kiko has a small orchard there. And Jeff's going to show us a demonstration of the installation. And we can answer a few more questions there and wrap up the day.
What's the difference if I, the pressure regulator and I put the hose directly in the ground without the whole end you have there? What's the difference?
Then they would get roots growing up into it. And they would get roots that would grow all the way up into where the grapevines were, all the way up through the entire irrigation hose. They get roots growing all the way back through it and clogging it. Once they did it, they had to take all the hoses out. Okay, so DRI, when you do it with just putting that in there in the ground like that, it'll work for a short period of time. By putting the shroud out there, the shroud allows us to dissipate water over a longer area. If you have it just coming off the end of the tube, then it starts at that tube and it will find the path of least resistance. When we spread that water out over a long shroud, it starts pushing it out in multiple directions and it holds the dirt away from the end of the tube. So we found that when we put the shroud on there, the shape of the shroud and the length of the shroud makes an effect on the wet pattern. And we found that whenever it pushes it out from a pattern that's that long, we get a really nice dispersion. So when we compared it with just having a tube in the ground, because we compared it with tube in the ground, we had some farmers that were just putting PVC with holes in it, with the tube going into that. And we're willing to put DRI up against any method that's out there because DRI will outperform it. And part of it is it's the shape, the pattern, the wetness, and how we're able to sustain it. There's actually some really unique features by the way we do it that we do. And it took a lot of testing to make sure that it comes out exactly right. And you could get away for a while, like you said, with just putting the 1/4-inch tubing down there, but it's not something that you could leave on the tree for the life of the tree. Eventually, you'd end up with some problems. So our objective is to give you something that has no problems for the life of the tree. Did that answer your question?
Okay, guys, again, whoever would like to join us, we're going to head straight over there. I appreciate all you guys for coming. Hope you guys got your time's worth.